Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is, well, it's the really challenging behavioral profile of the orca Keto. He was a male born in captivity back in 1995 and sadly passed away earlier this year.
And the core question really is how we should view him. I mean, when you look at Keto's life, especially that awful incident in 2009 with trainer Alexis Martinez, do we focus on the documented aggression, the dominance as his defining trait?
Or do we give equal weight to those accounts that described him as, gentle and surprisingly soft-mannered?
I'm going to argue that we really need to look at the complexity, the sort of duality of his temperament. And I'll be taking a slightly different angle. While, yes, complexity is always part of the picture with these animals, I think the evidence shows a pretty consistent and frankly severe pattern of aggression throughout his life. And for me, that pattern tends to overshadow the more isolated reports of docility. I'm focusing on that clear history of dominant, sometimes problematic behavior.
Okay, but I want to emphasize that inherent duality that experienced trainers noted. He was, and this is documented, often described as very gentle and soft-mannered. And maybe the most telling detail is that he was frequently the whale assigned to new trainers, a sort of beginner whale.
Right, I've seen those reports.
External stress, like his known reliance on a stable social structure.
See, I just don't buy that the dominance was only situational. The history, it just shows such a clear pattern. Starting way back when he was young, trainers literally nicknamed him Punk because he was so disruptive. Then later, in San Diego, there were reports of him displaying aggressive displacement towards trainers during waterwork attempts.
Meaning he was pushing them?
Physically forcing them out of his space, yeah. And that builds up to him being described later as the most dominant male at the park. And then ultimately you have the tragedy on December 24th, 2009. That pattern seems pretty linear to me.
Okay, that brings us right to the core issue then. How do we square that gentle description with the undeniable severity of the 2009 incident?
Exactly. You look at the autopsy report for Alexis Martinez, it's explicit. It calls it a violent death. It details collapsed lungs, fractured ribs, a fractured sternum, a lacerated liver, and fluid in the lungs from, quote, mechanical asphyxiation due to compression and crushing. That level of force, that specific kind of crushing trauma, it's hard to reconcile that with a generally manageable animal.
That's incredibly stark evidence, no question. But we also have to remember the gentle description that was used after 2009 as well. For example, around 2011, when the Orca Morgan arrived, it suggests trainers, even after the fatality, still viewed him as generally predictable on a day-to-day basis. And consider this. Trainers continued to perform waterwork with his young calves Adon, Victoria, and Eula in the years that followed. That continued interaction, that management style, it suggests the staff likely saw the fatality as a specific, maybe context-driven extreme outlier, not necessarily the definitive statement about his everyday temperament or, his whole lineage.
Okay, I see that point about timing, but let me push back on the lineage interpretation. Couldn't the cautious management of his calves actually suggest the opposite? That staff knew his unpredictable dominance might be an inherited trait they needed to watch very carefully, rather than just seeing the 2009 incident as a complete one-off.
That's an interesting way to frame it. But we also absolutely have to factor in the environmental instability. Before he finally settled at Laurel Park in 2006, Keto was moved 4 times between different SeaWorld parks: Orlando, San Diego, Ohio, Texas.
A lot of moves, yeah.
A lot. And we know from behavioral notes that he relied on a stable social structure to maintain calm behavior. He reportedly got agitated when isolated, so this constant upheaval, it likely made any behavioral inconsistency worse, right? It highlights how critical that external context, the stability, was for him.
That's fair. Stability matters. But I'd argue his dominance seems more like a consistent internal trait, almost independent of the environment. Even when he was in what seemed like a stable structure, for instance, when paired with Kayla, who became the matriarch in Texas, Keto was still noted to display dominance toward the other male orcas, specifically Q-Cout.
So even with supposed stability, that drive to be dominant was still clearly present.
So when we try to piece it all together, you have his mixed heritage, 75% Icelandic, 25% Southern resident, which itself can lead to unique traits, sometimes exceptional size. You have his huge weight, recorded at 8,600 pounds in 2015, and then this radical split between aggressive incidents going back to 98 and these later reports of patience. It just completely complicates any easy label for his temperament.
Absolutely. It leaves us weighing, on one hand, the very specific, very severe physical evidence of lethal aggression, and on the other, the subjective but professional assessments of his manageability, his patience in daily training. The documentation really does paint two fundamentally different pictures of the same animal, and it forces us to confront just how difficult it is to truly assess the behavioral complexity of a highly dominant male orca living in captivity.